Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Recruit, Motivate, and Retain Top Talent. We're going to focus today on the competitive landscape for resources. So we're very excited that you're going to be with us, and I would like to introduce myself. My name is Janice Snyder. I'm a partner here at McConley & Asbury. I'm the Director of Audit and Assurance Services, and I have here with me Brett Bauer. So Brett, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Janice. I'm Brett Bauer. I'm a Senior Manager here at McConley & Asbury. I serve a number of our clients in the manufacturing and distribution industry. And so some of what I'm going to contribute today is going to focus a little bit more heavily on those industries, although this is certainly a topic that spans many industries.
Great, thank you, Brett. I know we were excited, and when Brett and I were planning for this webinar, we work on a lot of manufacturing clients, and we certainly started with what are the challenges our clients are facing, and I can kind of summarize that with two things. Everybody needs more people and more space. But all organizations needing more people and how to attract them, motivate, retain them, just became an issue, whether I'm on a nonprofit board or I'm working with a healthcare organization or the many manufacturing clients that I work with. This certainly rose to the top of challenges that businesses are facing. Right, Brett?
Yes, that's absolutely the case.
All right, so for those of you who don't know, McConley & Asbury is an accounting and business advisory service firm with offices in Camp Hill, Lancaster, and Bloomsburg, as you see there on the slide. We work with lots of industries, and you see there our manufacturing and distribution, which was the target audience for this webinar, but we certainly affects all companies, and I know we have a lot of nonprofits and healthcare and family-owned businesses and construction on here with us today as well, so we're glad you're here. If you joined us on past webinars, welcome back. If you haven't, our monthly webinars feature various business topics to keep you updated on what's going on around us. So be sure to check out our website. It's down there in the bottom right-hand corner if you haven't done so already. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest today, Rob Marchalonis. I am so excited to have Rob here with us today. I've known Rob for a little over a year now. Can you believe that, Rob?
Yes.
I started talking to Rob a little over a year ago, and I said, geez, I really want to help motivate and incentivize our team and our employees. And I got to work with Rob over the course of several months, and we'll talk about some of our success there. We're still early on in our processes. And I loved Rob's insights, his patience, and his direction at basically asking me all the right questions to help us get there. So you see Rob's bio here, certainly has a history of being a CEO of a marketing and manufacturing company. He had tremendous success there with his team and in the ways he motivated them and increased their productivity with 15 times sales growth. He's innovated and worked with hundreds of different companies, and his real focus is with individuals, work groups, and organizations. So you can see businesses and nonprofit leaders. And I loved it when Rob says to me, when you find the right way to share your success, everybody wins. Right, Rob? So thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you appreciate his insight.
Yeah, well put, Janice.
Thank you, Rob. So Rob, I want to give you a moment. We have a few things here about your companies and certainly the book that you were an author of. So Rob, can you just share a little bit before we get into our content here today?
Sure. Well, thanks to you, Janice and Brett and everyone with McConley, and just happy to be with you here today. I love this topic of employee engagement and motivation, recruiting, retaining employees. It's certainly relevant, maybe more relevant than it's ever been. I started my career as an engineer and quickly went down an operations path where I was, early on leading work groups and became interested and ultimately passionate about employee productivity and how we do that, the various different ways we drive employee productivity. And so I was in operations for almost all my career, started in engineering operations, spent some time in sales and marketing, And then, in my 20s, became a general manager and ultimately CEO of a fast-growing manufacturing company. And so that's then most of my background. I retired out of that business about 10 years ago and focused my professional career since then on employee productivity and through a business I have called LSP 123. And specifically out of that is, as we'll talk about, my favorite way to drive employee productivity is by putting skin in the game with smart incentive plans. So I have a business built around that called IncentShare, which we'll talk about here a little bit.
Great, thanks so much, Rob. So I'm going to move us through to our agenda for the day. Let's see. So we kept it pretty simple, but I think there's a lot of content in here. So we're going to start with identifying the problem. I'm sure you all could have lots to contribute to that discussion as well. Brett will walk us through a lot of data and kind of where we are with that. And then we're going to talk about some of the potential solutions that we've seen organizations implement, and we've seen, tactics they're trying, things they're evaluating, things that they're looking at. And then we're going to dive a little deeper into Rob's experience and some successes with IncentShare. So the first one, we'll hit this pretty briefly as we're going to identify the problem. So there's a labor shortage. I don't think that's new. I think that's been a problem for several years. We need more people, more skilled labor, more individuals qualified to do the positions that we need in the market. Some of those existing concerns that were already there were certainly exacerbated by the pandemic. We're seeing trends of employees that don't want to return to work or don't want to return to offices, or manufacturing jobs are in person. A lot of our healthcare jobs still need to be done in person, and there's not a whole lot of creative solutions there. So the labor shortage continues, and we continue to see challenges. Brett's going to walk us through how that plays into some of the population trends in Pennsylvania and things particularly challenging in manufacturing as they're trying to attract that talent.
Yeah, and Janice, one thing I would point out here, those first two bullet points, the labor shortage and the fact that the pandemic has just made this worse, I think it's important to keep those as two distinct problems, because when it comes to finding solutions to your labor issues, you really need to keep in mind that there's both the current immediate need called out through the pandemic, but there's also been an underlying labor shortage going back a number of years, and the solution to those two problems is probably different. And so let's keep those kind of separate as we're thinking through this. All right, so I have a few graphs here which illustrate the problems that Janice just mentioned. This first graph illustrates the labor shortage caused by the pandemic specific to the manufacturing industry. So you can see very clearly there in 2020 that drop in manufacturing jobs filled of over 1.4 million jobs lost due to the pandemic. Now, obviously, we've rebounded a bit and gained a lot of that back, but there's still nearly 600,000 jobs in manufacturing that have not yet returned. And if you can see at the bottom of this graph, that's 600,000 jobs. That represents about 6 years worth of job growth within the manufacturing industry. So one of the takeaways here is that it could be several years before in manufacturing we get back to the level of jobs filled that we had pre-pandemic.
That's such an enormous challenge, Brett. I know we meet with different organizations and they have so many job openings right now. It's definitely a challenge. I hear about it on their lines and in their plants, and I also hear the need for drivers, forklift operators, all sorts of things within the manufacturing industry.
Absolutely. All right, so this next slide shows that about 2/3 of manufacturers are seeing a skills shortage. So the last slide was talking about overall labor shortage, but specific to manufacturing, there's also a skills shortage. And a skills job in manufacturing would be those positions which require some level of technical training. So you can think of machinists, welders, maintenance technicians, folks like that. And then off to the right-hand side of this graph, we have the top causes of the skills shortage, which I thought was very interesting. You know, when you look at those top two issues, I think they're relatively similar, and they can be summarized as, you know, you either have a group of people who are not at all interested in going into manufacturing for whatever reason, or they give it a shot. They work a little bit in manufacturing, but find out it's not what they expected. And that's something I hear from my clients all the time, that, you know, people coming out of school are not attracted to you know, the working conditions that are present in many manufacturing plants, whether that's you know, the notoriously loud plants themselves, or it could be the conditions. You know, a lot of manufacturing plants are hot, or if you're in food manufacturing, it could be, could have some refrigerated space, so maybe it's a little too cold. But whatever it is, all of these contribute to kind of less than desirable working conditions, which might be turning away some employees.
Brett, I know an organization I worked with several years ago surveyed a bunch of their employees or potential employees about who could come into their plant and who would be working there. And although it was a few years ago, I think it's still relevant today, that they found that a lot of the mindset of these young workers that would enter into jobs working for their company was that my arrangement today needs to work for me forever. I'm not waiting for retirement to have flexibility or to have freedom, and I'm not putting off what I want to accomplish today, because one, I'm not sure I'm going to retire. Some of them watched, you know, their parents and their plans or things like that fall apart in 2008 and 2009. Some of them aren't so sure that Social Security is going to be there, and they're not so sure that they're going to have such a thing as retirement. So if you're looking at a workforce, a young workforce, say 20 to 30 years old, that are a lot of your potential employees, obviously there's other potential employees out there, but if their mindset is, I need to be able to wake up this morning and say, I want to go mountain biking today and not go to work, they want the flexibility to do that. And I think this pandemic has resulted in a lot more individuals saying, hey, I can have more flexibility, and I'm going to demand that. Some businesses that are trying to return employees to the office and make that mandatory have had to backpedal on that decision, as so many people said, we're just not going to do that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And that's, you know, part of the problem that we'll look at here too, is just the way that the workforce is aging, and with that, to your point, comes different preferences that we need to incentivize differently. So that makes sense. And the third cause here off to the right kind of goes along with what we're talking about with the different demographics, where there is a mass retirement of the baby boom generation. And so that's causing, you know, the skills shortage and just an overall shortage as well. And we'll take a closer look at the aging issue in 2 slides from now. But if we move on to the next chart. So this chart just shows overall population growth in the US compared to Pennsylvania. This is based on the last 3 rounds of census data. So you can see from comparing 2000 to 2010, the US grew by 10%, whereas Pennsylvania only grew at 3%. And then the most recent decade, looking at the current census that was just pushed out, the US grew by 7%. Again, PA is lagging at only 2%. So a takeaway there is the population in Pennsylvania is clearly not growing at the same rate as the rest of the country, and now that obviously will impact our local labor market.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brett. It makes me feel a little fortunate to be in Cumberland County. That is one of the fastest growing counties in Pennsylvania, so they grow on the top 10 list, but that's obviously not true across the entire state.
Right. Yeah, and if you progress to the next slide, you can see not only is the population growing more slowly in Pennsylvania, this slide shows, you know, broken out by age group, how that change is coming about. I think this is very interesting because we might only be growing at 2% per decade, but that growth is really coming from those age 65 to 80. When you look at the workforce, you know, age between 40 and 55, you see that sharp downward trend in population growth in PA there in this chart. So I just want to maybe wrap up this section of the charts with one example that I came across, which I think illustrates a lot of what we've said so far. Many of you have either heard about or maybe you've experienced firsthand, I think Janice alluded to it earlier, this trucking shortage. So there's a massive need for truck drivers right now, and there are a few reasons for that. First of all, last year during the pandemic, a number of truck schools were shut down. You saw some DMV offices actually closing down, and that created obstacles for people, new drivers, to get their CDL licenses. So there's that obstacle, and then the other piece that's impacting the lack of truck drivers is the average age of a truck driver. I was very surprised to see is 55. So we've had a number of folks who, through the pandemic, just decided, you know what, this is enough. I'm going to retire a little early, or if they haven't retired yet, they're getting close to retirement. So that's this trucking issue that we're running into right now. And I noticed one article referenced how Walmart is trying to address this issue, which is by offering $8,000 sign-on bonuses for truck drivers in certain areas. And that's on top of other benefits they're giving. They're giving out quarterly safety bonuses, 21 days of PTO, your first year of employment at Walmart. So, some of you on the webinar today might be up against this same issue, lack of truck drivers for one example. But just keeping in mind what your competition is offering, the extent to which they're willing to go to attract the same limited pool of truck drivers that you may or may not be after.
Certainly a lot of challenges there. Thanks, Brett. So you led me right into the next slide of maybe some potential solutions. And I'll love to hear some of the things that Brett and Rob have to say about some of these potential solutions. But this was a result of us kind of brainstorming and say, what are we seeing that is happening? And Brett gave some very good examples of more bonuses and more incentives. And incentives certainly are Rob's expertise here today. But some of the other things we've seen in companies, or some of the things we've done ourselves as well, number one, of their broader recruiting efforts. So going out into new markets, new demographics, more diversity, reaching a broader audience. A lot of local jobs, if you can, are doing nationwide searches. I've seen that certainly with some CEO searches and some nonprofit searches, and they're really broadening their focus, and they're saying, how do we attract more people? And how do we cast a wider net? Are there new platforms? Are there new places we need to be posting jobs? What is the worker looking for? How flexible can we be in what we're offering? And I think a lot of companies are truly evaluating all of those things. Obviously, if we can, wages are going up. So I know my son started his first job. It was not minimum wage. It was like 50% above that, and he was not expecting that. But I think we're definitely seeing wage increases. I think that puts a lot of pressure on the companies, because that certainly is a solution. But you have to have the ability to do that and the ability to pass those prices on to your customers, or for some of the nonprofits on the line, be able to fundraise that money to be able to pay increased wages. So while it's certainly a solution, it comes with a tremendous list of challenges as well. One of the other things I've seen is some companies have looked at their year-end wage increases and said, you know what, we're not waiting till January 1st, or we're not waiting to a traditional timeline. Let's offer those pay increases now. Let's tell our employees this is coming. Let's offer them sooner. And let's say, don't leave for something better. We're increasing them at this moment, which again has financial implications. As an accountant sitting in an accounting firm, you've always got to work through the budget. But certainly another thing we are seeing companies doing. The next item that we've seen are enhanced benefits. So we see such a thing as more paid time off, increasing their vacation. Brett, you mentioned some of that in your example. Yeah. But some are going further to say, can we help pay for some childcare costs? That has certainly been a challenge through the pandemic. People are at home with their children. Like, where do they go? What do they do with them? Can they return to work? And if you take away some employees, this doesn't work for a manufacturing line, but the ability to work from home, they're suddenly in a bind that they don't have anyone to watch their children. Transportation costs are also a burden for some as well. I know some of the companies in the local market How do we get employees from Harrisburg up to Carlisle? How do we help them get there? Or get them to Hershey, or get them to other facilities where they need to work if they don't have cars or they don't have transportation? So companies are certainly getting creative on a lot of these fronts, and it's helping them attract those employees. Another one we see, well, I can just pause. Brett or Rob, anything to add on those first few? A lot of it was about money. Yeah,
but I think what you just touched on, the last two there with childcare costs and transportation, those are two big obstacles right now to people getting back into the workforce. So those make sense, and I think we've seen a lot of people trying to do whatever it takes to get employees to work. So that's something to consider.
The one thing I'd maybe add, Janice, and we'll talk about this more, is you're right that there's often what appears to be a bidding war for employees and especially for talent. And, if you think about the process of the bidding war, is there's some sort of a engagement or a negotiation up front, and we end up shaking hands with an employee for a salary or a wage, and it really is oftentimes has no connection or very little connection to the results that we're hoping or expecting that employee to achieve. And that's where I think incentives, creative incentives, variable compensation starts to, I think it's always made sense, but I think maybe right now it makes more sense than ever.
Great, thanks, Rob. We certainly see that on there with more bonuses or more incentives. So looking forward to talking about that more.
I would add too, Janice, you mentioned how a lot of these can be met by spending more money. I think it would be helpful for individuals considering going down this road to try to figure out, when you lose an employee, what is the cost of each lost employee? There certainly is a lot of money that you're losing as you're having to retrain people. Keeping in mind, especially again, manufacturing, a newer hire is more likely to have safety issues arise. So what's the cost every time you lose someone? What is it worth to retain that individual?
Absolutely. It definitely costs a lot of money to recruit someone and to train them and to actually make them productive within your organization. So certainly keeping them is the better option, which I think is what everyone on this call would like. Just got to figure out how to do it. So yeah, you see other things there. I mean, more flexibility. We definitely see the workforce pushing for that. More work from home, more alternative flexible work arrangements, part-time work arrangements, things like that. Certainly will allow you to attract more employees. But what I'm hearing more and more that I think is always kind of hung out in the background is improving your corporate culture and your morale. So what type of organization we are, what do our employees say they love about working here? Why do our best employees stay here? And how can we leverage that? So I know a couple organizations that are starting on that journey and saying, why do people love to work here and how do we get them to stay? If you can talk to the ones who are here now, you might be missing something simple or something obvious that's really important to them that you just didn't think of that. So I know a lot of companies, I'm eager to see how it goes, but they're starting down that corporate culture and morale journey. The last thing we're seeing is certainly creative workforce solutions. I know working with some healthcare organizations, temporary nurses and things like that were very common. That certainly continued with traveling nurses and all sorts of solutions happening there. But I'm seeing it more and more on the manufacturing side, where they're bringing in temporary labor, part-time labor, bringing temporary housing set up for employees coming in from other countries, as you see some of the programs there for peak times in their business. But also, contracting out drivers and things of that nature. So on the manufacturing side, so there's a lot of contract labor, temporary labor, and I guess creative arrangements being reached in the workforce. So I guess the conclusion of all of these things, it's an employee's market. And I think the companies on this call already know that. And if you're not taking steps to address and evaluate these things within your organization, if you don't already have problems, they're probably going to start or become even more significant. All right. I will advance the next type of success with IncentShare. So I put a slide together here to lead us into a little bit more of our discussion with Rob today. So some of these topics here are going to include leverage and impact. I'm looking forward to Rob's discussion on hiring new people. That tends to be my solution. We have more work, we have more clients to serve, more companies we can help. This is exciting. I call that a good problem. But I tend to want to go out and hire. But I think looking at productivity is a good way to look at that as well. How productive are your work groups? How do you empower and motivate employees? Do you even know what motivates your employees? And then successful incentive programs. So Rob, I hope I teed that up well for you. So I want to start here with the leverage and impact model that you have provided us with.
Yeah. Thanks, Janice. So just to provide a little bit of context and perspective as we get into this, I've become a believer in LSP, and LSP is an acronym that I use for leadership, strategy, and process, right? Very familiar terms to, I'm sure, everyone online here, but it's a powerful simplification approach for leaders, for busy leaders, to think about LSP. And the one aspect of this that I believe is a starting point is the impact. My personal experience, my research, the many discussions and projects that I've worked on in this space has shown me that for almost all of our organizations, we have the greatest impact with our leaders, with our people, right? And when I say leadership, I really don't mean just at the top. I mean leadership at all levels. So we're realizing that in these days in a labor shortage, that just how critical our employees are. I'm just confirming that belief. I believe our greatest impact in our organizations is with our people and their leadership. One of the most critical things that we need leaders to do, however, is come up with great plans, strong plans or strategy, right? That's one of the primary functions of a leader, is what's their plan, what's their strategy to survive in some cases, but ultimately to succeed and to win and to thrive. And then out of process, the many processes we have, there's an impact, but out of the strategies we come up with are many processes. And in most cases, not always, but in most cases, it's not in the process where we have the most leverage and impact. It's not in how we process an order, or how we answer the phone, or how we unload the truck, or how we add value to the widget. It's no one of those makes or breaks us, but there are many of them, and there are critical. And so this is sort of an LSP context. So we're all, as leaders, we're looking for success strategies, right? And especially around this space of productivity. And if you can advance the slide here, I often hear about and get pulled into discussions where organizations that are looking to get better results or keep up with the workload or get through the backlog are planning to hire. They believe they need to hire. And I think in many cases this is true. But I would also suggest that along with hiring, how much effort and focus and attention are you giving to your employees' productivity? So if we start to think about this, if our employees are super productive, then yes, we would want more of those. But if our employee productivity is average or below average or substandard, then hiring may just be increasing our level of average or low productivity. So I believe it may actually be your biggest opportunity is your employees' productivity along with your hiring. If you advance the slide, this idea prompts the question of which of your work groups do you wish right now was more productive? which of your work groups do you wish was more productive? So when I say work group, a functional team, it could be a manufacturing team, it could be a group of field technicians, sales team, marketing team. I don't know what it looks like for you, but which work group right now, to make this very practical, do you wish was more productive? And let's try to quantify this. So when you think about that work group, how would you rate their current level of productivity on a scale from 0 to 100? 0 meaning nothing's getting done, and 100 is they're the most well-oiled championship team you've ever worked with. I ask this question a lot, and Janice and Brett, maybe, what number do you think I normally get back from leaders when they ask them to rate the work group productivity?
I think a lot of them would want to think their team is pretty good. So I would be hopeful that a lot of them will be like 70, 75%. But maybe they're really optimistic that they can do that much better. So what do you think, Brett?
I would have assumed 90. You assume you hire good people, retain good people, but what do you normally find, Rob?
Yeah, so, we're just coming off the Olympics, and it's kind of a fun example because if we watch these Olympic swimmers or runners, and we just know that they're at the top of their game. I mean, they're 99s or 100, right, in the world at what they do, and they hope they have that 100% performance. And so, just as an example, I think some of these professional athletes, Olympic athletes, are a good example of an extreme, right? So when I'm working with leaders and we're talking about productivity, and sometimes they have the whole company in mind, or sometimes they have a specific work group. Oftentimes we're having a discussion because there are concerns, or the leaders feeling like their work group's not doing as well as they would like. And so typically the number that I get back from a leader when I'm having this discussion is somewhere between 50 or 70. 50 or 70. And that's relative to their potential. So if you think about from 50 to 70 out of 100, and let's just split the difference to take an average, let's just say 60, somewhere between 50 and 70, let's take 60. For many organizations, that productivity level is not a crisis, right? You can continue to operate and run a business, maybe even make some profit with work groups that are operating at 60% of their potential. And so I see it almost every day. I'm sure many of you see it. Many of you may have a work group in mind where you're thinking, boy, yeah, my work group that I wish was more productive is between 50 and 70. So what do we do about that, right? Now, let's say we have a work group that's at 60 and we're not getting the work done, or we're behind. Well, we can hire. And so how often, leaders, I'm throwing this out to you, how often are you hiring or filling positions, putting people in a work group that's productivity is somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 70% of their potential?
So I think about that, Rob, but what do you think most work groups can run at? Like, I certainly don't think I'm an Olympic athlete, but I think I do a good job at what I do, but I wouldn't want to try to run at 99% every day. Ooh, I'm already exhausted. Can't even think about it. So what does a lot of organizations get to? Like, are they trying to get to 80? I mean, is 90% even achievable of what, I don't think everyone's going to push everyone to the level of an Olympic athlete, and I don't have that kind of stamina. But what's a reasonable level to achieve?
Well, and so you're asking just the right question, Janice, in terms of where to go with this question, right? And so if we just think about this, we can probably think of some work groups. We're sending we're sending aircraft into space now, and I'm guessing that's a pretty productive in terms of achieving the results safely work group. And so we can think of work groups that have very, very high productivity, depending on how you measure that, which is, you know, part of this. But where I normally go with this question, and the answer I get is, you're right, 100% is to me an unrealistic goal. Nobody's perfect, no organization's perfect. Like 100% isn't even, you know, worth thinking about. Even 90% I would suggest is not realistic for most of us, at least not in the short term. But what if you can take your work group that's averaging 60% productivity and take them up to 80% productivity? Right? I think that's the opportunity. It may be your biggest opportunity as an employer or a leader, because percentage-wise, to go from 60% productive to 80% productive is a 33% boost in productivity, right? Which is huge. And so that's the starting point on this discussion for me when it comes to employee productivity and as it relates to incentive plans. So there are many ways to boost our employee productivity, right? To go from 60 to 80. And many of those are low cost and no cost. And you mentioned some of them, you know, your culture, your leadership style. I strongly encourage every leader or every employer to start with the no cost, low cost approaches of, you know, sharpen your leadership skills, improve your systems, work on retaining good employees. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do that are low cost or no cost. But but of all the 50 plus approaches to increase employee productivity that I'm familiar with and I've used and endorse, there's one that I've found to be the most effective and efficient. And that is by putting skin in the game for the employees in the form of smart incentive plans. Smart incentive plans. So much so that I created a business around this called IncentShare. And, you know, the idea is with the context of LSP and believing that, boy, productivity is relevant and maybe as, if not more relevant than hiring, then okay, how do I move forward to increase the productivity of this workforce? And so I have the next slide, if you can pull that up. And let's talk through maybe one by one some of these insights. So the footer here is a powerful productivity solution, employee incentive plans. And since I'm throwing this out here, I thought it'd be worthwhile maybe just sharing a few insights with our audience to get you started and to give you some practical takeaways from this presentation. And, you know, please jump in or stop me here, Janice or Brett, or if we have anything coming in on the chat line. I'd like to keep this as interactive as possible. But the first step in my mind when it comes to incentive plans is to really think about incentive plans by work group, right? Think about it by your functional teams.
So, Rob, I know it would help me as you're asking us to think of this, and everyone's going to go through kind of their own analysis or assessment. Can you give me a specific example of a work group, what success looked like in that work group, and what some of the measures you implemented and the outcomes? I think that example will really help me to think this through and realize a lot of what you're saying as we go through these steps.
Sure. So a traditional, very familiar work group would be your sales team, right? Your sales team. And so, you know, almost all sales teams have some sort of a variable compensation component, and it's tied to some predetermined result, right? Usually. So could be top line sales, it could be new customer acquisition, it could be closing certain deals or size of deals, could be tied into a financial metric like margin. And so it could be tied into a new product introduction or penetrating a new distribution channel. So sales would be a traditional one, but my belief is that virtually every work group can be incentivized. And so what about a group of truck drivers? You mentioned those, Brett. What about the team that services all the a fleet of vehicles? What about a factory floor? Certainly. What about an admin team working in the back office, customer service? And even into specialty roles like marketing and HR and IT. I believe every one of those work groups can be incentivized and should be incentivized to drive optimal productivity.
So when I think of a trucker, like miles driven with no incidences, like I don't know if that works. It depends on the organization. It depends on what you do. Like, would there be bonuses or an incentive tied to that? Would that be a good example?
Sure. You mentioned a good point, because it ties into point number 2 here is, if we're going to come up with smart incentive plans, and I sort of say that with a smile. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of dumb incentive plans, and I think we need to focus on smart incentive plans. And so certainly point number 2 here is how do you link your plans by work group to their results? So let's go back to truck drivers, which you mentioned. Sure, when we think about what matters most when it comes to truck drivers or your trucking team, right? Maybe safety would come to mind as a top result. Maybe on-time deliveries would come to mind. Maybe fuel efficiency, reduced maintenance, fewer violations, right? I mean, we could probably build a list of 10 to 20 key results that that I know fleets and shipping teams are thinking about. So that sort of becomes the work in all this, is figuring out, okay, with that work group, what are the results that we should choose to incentivize?
Yeah, Rob, I'm sitting here smiling. I know when I joined the accounting profession more years ago than I'll mention, I was shocked that, the billable hour was everything. And I said, well, it could take me 3,000 hours a year to do my job, or 2,000 hours a year to do my job. And the organization I'm working for gets paid the same either way. And the person that works 3,000 hours gets more bonuses and more rewards because they worked more. And I said, gee, I was there 9 months. I walked up to the partner and said, gee, you reward inefficiency. They said, nah, you don't understand. And so you got to evaluate really what is that measure, because if you're measuring and incentivizing the wrong thing, you're going to incentivize the wrong results.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And it takes us to point number 3 here, Janice, which is, for almost any work group we could think about, or any work group you could throw at me, I could help you come up with 20 different results that would be potentially important. But in the next discussion, I would probably shift the thinking from, okay, let's go from all the results down to which results are the most relevant to drive effective performance and are simple. There's a phrase I like when it comes to incentive plans, that you want them sophisticated enough to work, but simple enough to be understood. Sophisticated enough to work, meaning they get the results that you want, but, and this is a big one, but simple enough to be understood by the participants, right? If we build a 20-item list and matrix with a group of truck drivers, we might find that we throw way more complexity at the challenge than we can benefit from.
Rob, from the hundreds of companies that you worked at, is there one that stands out to you that was effective and simple that you could quickly share with us? Is there an example like that?
Well, there are numerous, and so when I think of work groups, and my preferred starting point in an organization when we have discussions and we think about work groups is to start with the senior leaders, right? To start with the senior leaders in the organization. It kind of goes back to my LSP thinking, believing that our highest level, most experienced highest responsibility leaders are very likely have high responsibility for the results and the outcomes in the business. And so one simple way to do that would be to tie your senior level leaders into some high level result. So if I'm Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson, who's sending spaceships into passengers into space, right? And we think about, wow, what's at this point for flight number one, what's the most important result? I'll throw that out for the group to think about. What is the most important result if you wanted to incentivize that team?
Everybody lives.
I'm no expert on the topic. I mean, I'm an engineer, but I'm no expert in the topic. But I would completely agree with you, Janice. In the first flight, we want to bring everybody back safely, right?
Right.
So, and we in that specific case, you've got to be very careful of incentivizing. Certainly, in this case, life and death, and it's it's not really a. I'm smiling, but it's not a laughing matter. But really, it's not about making money. It's certainly not about making money in that first flight, right? Maybe down the road to sustain that. And so I think it's just, and I'm kind of freestyling here and using that one as an example. In the Olympics, the system has built in the prize. What's the incentive for an Olympic athlete? What's the highest level?
Gold medal.
Right. And what's the lowest level? Just to think about this. Most of those Olympic athletes get the benefit of what?
Saying they went to the Olympics.
Yeah.
You made it there.
Just being there, sure, right? And so some systems, interestingly, have a very a very cool built-in incentive and reward, right? And so going back to senior leaders, though, to make this practical, I oftentimes we'll structure incentive plans for senior leaders around a financial result. Right? It could be net profit, it could be wealth creation, it could be debt reduction, but it's simple, it's clear cut. If your senior leaders aren't thinking about and working towards some bottom line financial results, and it's not the only one, and I'm not saying it's senior leaders are responsible for typically dozens of results, right? But from a simplification standpoint, a good, healthy, profitable company that's also reinforcing a number of other things can company can go a long way with strong financial performance. So that's just one example.
Yeah, I know, Rob, you worked with us and we worked through different numbers and different metrics, and I was very quick to say most accounting firms measure the billable hour, and I said, oh, no, I know how that can absolutely incentivize the wrong behaviors. So we designed something quarterly, like you said here, that is linked to a measure of profits. It is simple. It's not simply profits, but we are able to get everyone to demonstrate our core value of we, not me. And how do we help everyone in the organization be more efficient and more effective at their jobs? So it goes right down to the IT help desk, respond timely, so I don't have people that can't log in and can't work for times of the day. So does our administrative support help us find more ways to streamline processes and do things more effectively? To, of course, quality tax and quality audits and tax returns and back office accounting and valuations and all types of things like that need to happen in between. But every single person in the organization can help us to be more efficient, more effective, and as you say, more productive. So, and we are now incentivizing that as well.
Right on. Yes. So just to move through the list here quickly. So people will often ask me how much from incentives, and my quick and simple answer is your incentives will really be powerful if they comprise 15% or more of total compensation. 15% is the magic threshold, I believe. So if somebody's making $10 an hour, getting an incentive that will reward them another $1.50 an hour is starts to be meaningful to the employee. And so I'm not saying right out of the chute, sometimes employees have a lot of work to do to get up to that 15% threshold. But if you're trying to really motivate and boost your productivity with 0.5% of incremental compensation, I believe that you're not going to get there. So,
And
you know, this is a trick. This is the tricky one, but it is relevant to a lot of folks that are thinking about or have incentive plans in place.
And I would say most organizations don't have an extra 15%, either in their bottom line or lying around as a nonprofit in cash reserves. So you certainly have to find ways to streamline process and drive productivity. So there is the ability to incentivize individuals in that way.
So I'll give you a quick example on that. So years ago, I had experience with an administration team, right? Or actually, it was a customer service team that had about 8 team members in customer service. I don't know, handling 1,000 to 1,200 phone calls, incoming inquiries a week, and just as an example, so for a long time, more than 2-3 years, 8 people were handling this workload, and one person left. And my input on that was, hey, let's take a time out before we replace this person. They were at 8, they went down to 7. I said, before we hire the next employee up to 8, what if we put in place an incentive plan? And so we went out to the team and we said, hey, you know, we certainly understand we lost a person. We know that this is putting an additional burdens on you. We have an option we want you to consider, and that is we can hire a new person for X amount of dollars, or if we can figure out how to get the work done, we'd rather share that money, or at least a portion of that money, back with all of you. And so the work group replied in so many words, well, gosh, we didn't know that that was an option, that if we just absorb that workload, we can actually share in that our increased productivity. And so as it turned out, sure enough, that work group went from 8 to 7. They absorbed the work. They started to receive some nice incentives, and it was win-win. And so the employer won because their net outlay of expense was less, and the customer service team, without putting in any more hours, was able to absorb that workload. That team actually went down another person, so they went from 8 down to 6. Not only absorbed the workload, but absorbed an increasing workload as the company grew. And so that's an example. From 8 to 6 is a 25% reduction in labor. And so, you know, a nice portion of that was shared back with the employees, and really everybody was happy.
Sounds like, Rob, in incentivizing the employees, but maybe just as importantly, if not more, but empowering them to make changes and improvements and to say, we can do this better. Not work harder or more, but we can do this better was a key factor in that.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Brett.
I was just going to say, it sounds like just even the open communication with the employees. Like if I were the employee, I would appreciate that so much, to know that, you know, it's up to us to rally together and decide that this is the right way to go.
Yeah, Brett, and just as we start to wind this down, and you touched on it, is you're touching on it. You mentioned the culture, and so at the highest level of smart incentive plans, you actually shift the culture from you know, I do what I'm told, I have my tasks, I have my job, this is what I do, to employees become more entrepreneurial. They actually are part of the solution and the innovation, and they're sharing in the success of the business, right? And so the cultural shifts I've seen have been the greatest breakthrough. I've seen teams increase their compensation by 25%, but that's nothing compared to the company going from being a average company to a best place to work in Pennsylvania business. And you know, to me, that's kind of the highest level of fulfillment in all this, is when we actually end up with a motivated, engaged, and retained workforce. Now, there's no pass on them being busy. That customer service team I referenced, they were busy, right? But you know, they were productive. And we supported them. They were supported with you know, systems and software and training and encouragement. You know, leadership needs to help the teams be more productive. But it's just a very fulfilling. You know, none of these are perfect. No systems, no work groups, no incentive plans are perfect. But it really, to me, is a huge step in the right direction. And my experience has just been so powerful that I've continued doing this work as a passion of myself. I do believe 5 and 6, the frequency of payout is important depending on the work group, from either monthly payouts of incentive based on results to quarterly at the least frequent. And all of these incentive plans need to be launched. Let's find a way to launch one, to monitor it, and ultimately they can and should be evolved. So, none of these need to be set in stone. People get fearful of that. And I say, just start an incentive plan conservatively if you must, and willing and able to evolve it.
Great. I just moved us to the live Q&A section. So I know that I think Brett is excited and ready to ask a question. So go ahead.
Yeah, Rob, so at the beginning of the webinar, I kind of bifurcated the labor issue into the short-term immediate need, exacerbated through the pandemic, versus this long-term labor shortage issue, which has maybe more underlying issues. In what way would you say what you're talking about now, this focus on productivity, focus on incentivizing employees, in what way will that help in the short term with that need, and in what ways will that focus help with the underlying long-term issues?
Right. It's a good question. I say that the best incentive plans do not decrease morale in any way, shape, or form. So the best smart incentive plans only lift morale. Okay, so that's kind of a goal, a little bit of a visionary goal there for incentive plan is, you don't want an incentive plan that makes people nervous or feel manipulated or concerned that, wow, what is this? I don't understand it, or gosh, I don't trust it, even worse. So we mentioned one of those is what if you were able to get your existing workforce to step up their productivity? And from 60 to 60%, 80%, like we talked about, or to lose a team member and say, hey, we will absorb, or we'd like to at least try to absorb this workload because we have some upside, we have some skin in the game. So I think short term, it's my favorite way to transition a work group that you're expecting more from, okay? Without having to hire a new person. And think about hiring, like every new hire, as diligent as we are, comes with enormous risk and enormous commitment. And so why not reflect back, why not direct that energy and in some cases the risk back on your team and say, look, and I would sort of play this in a way as a leader. This was a style approach that, I was never perfect at, but my style approach was, hey, look, folks, we recognize a dilemma here, and so of having more work or not enough people, and so we're faced with this choice. In many ways, it could cost us about the same amount. What would you prefer? Would you prefer we go out and bring some new person in on the team, or would you prefer we try to figure out how to be more productive ourselves? When given a chance to, you don't want to shove this down somebody's throat, but when given a chance for somebody to reflect, and I'd say, look, you guys can decide. We can hire somebody new from the outside who none of us know yet, or we can sort of put ourselves to the test, and we can trust in ourselves.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. So I know we're down to our last 2 minutes, so we've given you hopefully a lot to think about today. So are you looking at where you're recruiting, how you're recruiting? Are you looking at, can you get wage increases? I mean, you may have to, bonuses, but are you also looking at other things like culture, morale, incentive plans like Rob talked about today? So what are the types of things? Where can you have flexibility? Can you offer better benefits or leave? There's definitely a lot of things you can do, maybe nothing earth-shattering, but we thought one of the more creative things was obviously incentive plans, and we wanted to bring that in a little more detail to you today. So any last words or last comments, Rob or Brett? We got a minute, so.
No, nothing else from me, but I really appreciated Rob coming on and just sharing kind of his experience with Incentive Share, and we've certainly appreciated that help with the firm already. As Janice mentioned, we've been working with Rob this past year, so thank you to Rob.
Great. Any last comment, Rob, as I wrap it up here?
No, thanks. This work is a passion and a privilege for me, and so enjoy talking about it, enjoy helping organizations really to put skin in the game and share their success. That's the language I like to use. Is let's share our success back with our employees that help us achieve this success, and it's really it's pretty hard to argue with the concept, but the challenge is in some of the details. But it really isn't. To go back to our space friends, it really isn't rocket science. It's just a lot of string of common sense decisions, and encourage people to think about it at a minimum.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for today's session. A special thanks to Rob. We certainly appreciate your expertise and your insights today. I hope you found some useful tips in this presentation and some items that can help you recruit, motivate, and retain top talent in this challenging landscape. So please don't hesitate to reach out to McConley and Asbury, or you have Brett, myself, and Rob's contact information there. I'm sure Rob would love to hear from you as well. So especially if you want to continue any of the conversations that we started today. Have a great afternoon.